In the 1920s, 3 miles north of Turtle Lake in North Dakota, normal life was shattered by the news of the murders at the Wolf farm. Jacob and Beata Wolf, 5 of their daughters, and a farmhand were all killed in mysterious circumstances. From pretty much the off, police suspected their neighbour, Henry Lair. Jacob had been born in 1879 at Bergdorf in Moldova, while Beata Bossert was born at Hofningstal in modern-day Ukraine in 1885, and both had emigrated to the US to make better lives for themselves. Jacob had settled at Turtle Lake in around 1903. It was here he met and married Beata in 1905, and the couple ran a successful farm, employing 13-year-old Jacob Hofer to help around the farm. Over the years, the family expanded with the birth of their daughters, Bertha, Maria, Edna, Lydia, Martha and Emma. They were well liked by locals, although there had been some tensions with other farmers before, especially Henry Lair, but nothing so bad that could have resulted in their murders. On the morning of Saturday 24th April 1920, a neighbour, John Kraft, noticed that the Wolf's washing had been left on the line for over 24 hours, and during a storm, and that 3 of their horses remained saddled by some haystacks, and it just seemed very unusual. He also hadn't seen any of the wolves doing their normal chores around the farm, so he and his wife drove over to it. The first thing they noted was the sound of a crying child. They cautiously entered the house. In the kitchen they found a trail of blood leading to the door of the cellar. It was here they found the body of 35-year-old Beata, who'd been shot in the back at close range, 12-year-old Bertha, who'd been shot in the face and appeared to have been attacked with a hatchet, 5-year-old Lydia, who'd also been attacked with a hatchet but had died from a gunshot wound to her head, and 3-year-old Martha, but she hadn't been shot. She'd been beaten with the hatchet. The final victim in the cellar was Jacob Hofer, who'd been shot through the neck, and his body lay on top of the others. Shocked by the discovery, the Crafts continued to look through the house, as they could still hear the baby. They found 8-month-old Emma still in her cot by the window, but she hadn't been fed or changed for what was believed to be 2 days. The Crafts then turned their attention outside. They found 41-year-old Jacob Wolf, who'd been shot in the back, once from a distance and once from close range, close to the barn. It was in the barn they found 9-year-old Maria and 7-year-old Edna, whose bodies lay beneath a pile of hay. Both had been shot in the back of the head at very close range. The Crafts tried to call the police on the Wolf's landline, but the telephone cable had been severed, so they took Emma to their home and called the police from there. Needless to say, the authorities were shocked and stunned. When the police arrived and were met with the gruesome sight, they concluded the murders had taken place on Thursday, 22nd April, 2 days before their discovery. As they investigated the site, they took note of the phone line. There was a large pool of blood in the kitchen, so was it possible Jacob Hofer was the only victim shot there? There was blood spatter on the walls of the cellar, so it seemed likely to police the 4 females had been forced into it before being shot. The bodies of Bertha and Jacob, the farmhand, had been wearing gloves, so this led detectives to believe they'd just come in from the fields or had been doing chores around the farm when they were killed. The police also discovered the hatchet used during some of the attacks, along with bloodied overalls and rags in the kitchen. The overalls were thought to have belonged to Jakob Wolf, and the perpetrator had tried to clean the blood on the floor with them. Investigators also managed to follow the footsteps of Maria and Edna to a window, so police surmised they'd left the house through it to escape the killer or killers, and had hidden beneath the stack of hay in the barn, where they were found. Jakob Wolf had also been running towards the barn when he was shot, then dragged into it and left with his dead girls. E.N. Mayer, an auctioneer involved in the sale of the property after the killings, discovered the double 12-barrel gauge shotgun, believed to have been used in the killings, in a swamp or pond not far from the property. There were also male footprints leading to the water. But this turned out to be a dead end for police, as it couldn't be traced. However, it did mean that the gun would have to have been reloaded several times during the shootings. Police interviewed neighbours. One of these heard gunshots at the property at 10 a.m. on the Thursday, but thought nothing of it, as on farms, guns are used to control vermin, etc. And another witness said they were talking to Beata on the phone at the time when the line suddenly went dead. Bertha Wolf and Jacob Hofer were spotted in a field near the house by another neighbour around 11:30, which ties in with them wearing the gloves when their bodies were discovered. After a week with no arrest made, locals were becoming anxious. They raised $10,000 in reward money for the killer's capture. It was at this point the Attorney General, William Langer, decided to send over his own team of private investigators to help the local police in their investigations. He also put up $1,000 and soon arrived with 3 of his investigators in Turtle Lake. The chief of local police in Bismarck was Chris Martinson, and although Turtle Lake was out with his jurisdiction, he became involved thanks to Langer and received Langer's $1,000 reward money. The other investigators encouraged to take the case by Langer were George McDowell, an agent for the North Pacific Railway, and Eugene Hesner of the Field Detective Agency of St. Paul. Also assisting was Sheriff Ole Henry Stefferud of McLean County, along with Beata's brothers and Emmanuel Hofer, who cared for little Emma during the investigation. Governor Lynn Fraser, meanwhile, came under fire, while his political opponent, Langer, was gaining in popularity. It came to light that Jakob Wolf and his neighbour, 35-year-old Heinrich Lehr, anglicised to Henry, had a long-standing feud over a cow. Like the Wolves, Lehr had been born in southern Russia in November 1884 and had emigrated with his parents to North Dakota in 1886. He married his wife Lydia in 1912 and was one of the Wolves' neighbours. One of Henry's cattle had crossed into Jakob's property in November 1919, so Jakob had let his 2 dogs loose to chase the animal back to its own land, but one of the dogs bit the cow. Angry that his cow had been hurt, Lehr and Wolf argued over damages, but nothing seems to have come of it. Following the discovery of the bodies, Lehr helped maintain the Wolves' farm, like others in the community. However, suspicions were raised when Lehr arrived at one of the properties where Sheriff Stefferud was staying at 5 a.m. one morning and suggested gathering eggs in the hen coop, when instead of eggs, he found 3 shell casings in the hay. Police were said to have searched there earlier, but had found nothing, so this was suspicious. According to Lear, however, it was one of Beata's brothers who suggested he look in the coop. Soon he realised he was being considered as a suspect in the case. On Tuesday, 12th May, Lear was taken to Washburn for questioning. However, on the journey to Washburn, the police suddenly spotted a person by the side of the road who they supposedly believed to be a criminal. This man was put in the back of the car with Lear, and at Washburn was put into the same holding cell as him. He asked Lear a lot of questions during their time together, and it transpired the man was not in fact a criminal, but a private investigator, and police hoped Lear would confess to the wolf killings. When this didn't work, Lear was taken to an interrogation room. In it were Sheriff Martinson, Sheriff Stefferod, and George McDowell and Eugene Hessner, hired by the Attorney General. According to the police, Martinson asked Lear outright why he killed the wolves over and over again, and Stefferod tried to persuade Lear to confess by saying, "Confess now, because we all know you're the killer. Why did you do it, Henry?" Lear responded by insisting he was innocent, and when they thought they weren't going to get anywhere with him, they showed him the crime scene photographs. After hours of interrogation, and on seeing the gruesome images, Lear confessed. However, Lear told a different story of the investigation. He said police had told him there was an angry mob ready to lynch him outside if he didn't confess, and that he'd be safer in the police cells. This was when he broke down and told the officers what they wanted him to say. He also claimed he was assaulted by police officers during his interrogation, and he was seen with bruises while on remand. A hairdresser and prison doctor had seen the injuries, with the hairdresser stating that he'd been badly beaten up and both sides of his face and the top of his head were swollen. When the barber asked Lear what had happened, he told him he'd been beaten by his interrogators. When his wife and brother had come to see him, they were told he was in no condition to be seen, and they only saw him at the end of May for the first time since his arrest. Lear later stated, "After supper on May 12th, I was taken into custody and questioned, and shown pictures of the murder scene. They kept up the questioning until about 2:30 a.m, at which time the sheriff, Martinson, and a grey-haired heavy-set man, I believed to be a railroad detective, took turns at questioning me. They repeatedly told me there was a mob outside, and that the only chance of saving my life from being strung up on a telephone pole was to make a confession. They made me stand still until I was dizzy and faint. All this time I maintained I was innocent, and that I knew nothing of the murder. The man I thought was the railroad detective beat me along the side of my head and took me by the hair and pulled. He shook a billy club in my face and told me that if I did not say what he wanted, he would beat my brains out. I said I would do and say what they wanted." In his confession, Henry stated he confronted Jacob Wolf and demanded compensation for the injury done to his cow, but it was clear things didn't stack up. Firstly, why didn't he confront Wolf 6 months earlier when the incident happened? Why leave it so long? In his confession, Lear said he came to the farm from the north, but no one saw him, and he would have been seen by Jacob's neighbours. He also stated he'd arrived on foot at 11:30 a.m, but the gunshots were heard at 10 a.m. Lear then said he and Jacob had a confrontation in the house, but it was unlikely he'd have been invited into the property as he wasn't a friend of the family. He then stated he and Jakob struggled when Jakob pulled out a shotgun and it accidentally went off, killing Beata and Jacob Hofer. But Jakob Wolf didn't have a gun like the one used, and the blood in the cellar suggested Beata had been killed there. Lear then said Jakob Wolf fled from the house, so he grabbed more ammunition from a dresser and reloaded it, shooting at Wolf. But how did he know where the ammunition was kept in the house, when he'd never been in it? He then said that Edna and Maria Wolf ran towards the barn, fleeing from the shooting, but he shot them while the 3 other girls were in the house, screaming their heads off, so turned the gun on them, hitting them with a hatchet, then dragged their bodies to the cellar. However, Edna and Maria had been shot while hiding under the hay in the barn, while the 3 girls were killed in the cellar. He then said he returned outside and dragged Jakob Wolf's body to the barn, and claimed he never killed baby Emma because he never entered her room. So why did he spare her? He'd killed the rest of the family, and it all just seems so odd, especially as the cow in the whole affair had fully recovered. Following the confession, Lear was formally charged, and the police told the public that he wasn't right in his mind when he'd committed the murders. He stood before a judge, but only weeks later, Lear was advised he had the legal right to legal counsel and could change his plea from guilty to not guilty. The prisoner told him that he didn't want a solicitor and wanted to get to jail the quickest way possible, as he firmly believed his life was in danger. However, in the first statement Lear gave to police, he said he'd been ploughing his field from 8 until 12 noon, had lunch between 12 and 3 with his wife Lydia, and cleaned the barn, having never left the property all day, ploughing again from 3 till 7 that evening. He said in that statement he'd seen someone ploughing at the Wolf's farm, but couldn't say who it was. He also stated he'd seen other neighbours ploughing and spoke with his neighbour, Joseph Mayer. He also told Mayer that he'd wanted to go into town, but that his children were sick, so he was staying at home. Lydia also backed up her husband's story, saying she'd seen him around the farm all day. In a bid to get the case to trial, Lydia, her brothers and some friends went to visit Governor Lynn Fraser, but he denied them it. Both Martinson and Stefferud also denied Lear had been beaten into giving a confession, and said that he'd simply confessed after seeing the photographs. Martinson stated, Henry Lear was accused of committing the crime, and was urged repeatedly to admit the truth as he knew it to be, concerning the Wolf family murder. In November 1920, Lear's lawyers finally submitted to the court for his plea of guilty to be withdrawn, and changed to not guilty so he could go to trial. This was again denied. Henry Lear was sentenced to life imprisonment in the North Dakota Penitentiary in Bismarck, Burleigh County, where he became the head of the laundry department and was described as a model prisoner. He and his wife Lydia divorced in 1922, and he died on 21st March 1925, 5 years into his sentence, following complications from an operation for appendicitis 10 days beforehand. He was buried in a local cemetery. As for the Wolf family, when they were buried on Wednesday 28 April 1920, hundreds of people attended the funerals. The Wolf farm was auctioned off on Thursday 6 May, just weeks after the murder, and today only the windmill remains of the original farm. At the time, it was valued at between $25,000 and $35,000. Emma Wolf, the only survivor, went to live with her aunt and uncle, Christina and Emanuel Hofer, with Christina being Beata's elder sister. Emanuel died in 1932, aged 56, while she died in 1934, also aged 56. So the little girl then went to live with a local grocer, Emil Haas, and his wife, Vera, in Turtle Lake until she was 18. She went on to become a teacher and married Clarence Hansen on 29 September 1940, having 3 children, Priscilla, Curtis and Sheila. She died on 16 October 2003. If Henry Lair was innocent as he claimed, then these murders remain unsolved, and Lair suffered a miscarriage of justice. Why the family was murdered also remains open to speculation, but with the farm being auctioned off so quickly, it does throw up questions. Was the farm what the perpetrator wanted all along? Also, Jakob Wolf had a small safe at the property where he kept money. Was this a robbery gone wrong? Over 100 years has passed, and we still don't know what happened that fateful April morning.